I didn't realize something was wrong until I saw a middle-aged woman in a floppy sun hat lecturing a group of teenagers about lake safety, on my dock. I had driven down to my ranch's private lake expecting a quiet morning of fishing, maybe a cold beer and some peace, and instead I saw what looked like a suburban HOA cookout happening right on my property. There were banners tied to my trees reading Willow Creek Community Lake Day, folding chairs on the bank, a bounce house somehow floating in the shallows, and a guy with a megaphone directing parking on my gravel road. I stepped out of my truck and was immediately handed a paper plate of baked beans by a cheerful little kid who yelled thanks, Mr. HOA guy, before running off. That's when I locked eyes with her. Karen. Red blouse, clipboard, sunglasses the size of dinner plates. She marched toward me like she was expecting a guest who'd shown up late to his own trial and, without missing a beat, said you're just in time to refill the coolers. That's when I knew this was going to get weird. Now for context, my name is Eli and I inherited a 200-acre ranch from my grandfather 3 years ago. Tucked into those acres is a gorgeous, spring-fed lake surrounded by pine trees and silence. It's never been listed on any public community map, and it's not visible from the road. This land was homesteaded way before suburban neighborhoods crept in from the east side. When my grandpa passed, I took over the property and kept it mostly for myself and a few friends. No commercial use. No parties. No public access. So imagine my confusion when I found out the local HOA apparently believed they owned my lake. Or rather, they believed I had shared it with them. Without knowing it. Karen, as I later learned, was the president of the Willow Creek HOA. Her neighborhood bordered one corner of my property line, about a half-mile from the lake. Not adjacent, not connected, just vaguely nearby. But apparently, that was close enough for her to start spinning her web of delusion. She pointed to a laminated piece of paper pinned to one of my pine trees like it was a sacred legal document. It claimed the lake was historically communal due to neighborhood use and therefore subject to community access. She even had it in Comic Sans font, which, in hindsight, should have been my first red flag. I asked her as calmly as I could what gave her the right to throw a party on private land. She responded by rolling her eyes and saying we've had community events here for months. No one ever complained. I told her I had been out of town for a month on business and that this was, in fact, not only trespassing, it was organized, willful, entitled trespassing. That's when she gave me this syrupy smile and said, well, maybe you shouldn't own land if you're not going to use it. I almost laughed out loud. The boldness, the audacity, the sheer HOA-ness of it all. She wasn't done. She handed me a printout of what she called their updated zoning overlay, which was just a Google Maps screenshot with the HOA border colored in pink and a giant arrow pointing to my lake that said shared recreation area. I asked her if she got that from the county office or a kindergartner with a highlighter. She did not appreciate the joke. Now I could have thrown a fit. I could have started shouting. But I've learned that the best way to handle people like Karen is not to give them the reaction they expect. Instead, I took a long look around, nodded slowly, and said, enjoy your event. Just don't leave trash. She grinned, thinking she'd won. That was her first mistake. I got in my truck and drove straight to the county land office. I pulled the plat maps, deed history, water rights, the works. It was all exactly what I thought. My grandfather had full private rights. No easements. No shared jurisdiction. No legal access. No gray areas. The lake, the road leading to it, even the dock they were grilling on, completely and totally mine. I made copies of everything and took photos with timestamps for good measure. Just in case this got worse. Spoiler alert, it got a whole lot worse. By the time I returned the next afternoon, they had installed a wooden sign at the lake's entrance reading Willow Creek Community Lake and stapled laminated rules beneath it. No motorboats. No fishing without HOA permit. No alcohol. They had literally rewritten the laws of my land. A jogger from their neighborhood passed me on the trail and gave me a thumbs up, saying thanks for sharing this space, man. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just playing pretend, she was building a narrative. A fake reality with just enough polish to fool people who never asked questions. I called the sheriff's office and asked if anything could be done immediately. They said it was a civil matter unless I had evidence of damage or threats. I asked if installing unauthorized signs on private land counted. They said maybe, but not without prior warnings. So I played the long game. I documented everything. Took photos, videos. I even placed a wildlife trail cam facing the dock, which I suspected was being used more often than I realized. Then I waited. The next weekend, a man in swim trunks tried to install a floating slide in the water. Another day, someone backed a trailer down the dirt road with a pontoon boat. Kids were now biking down the gravel trail, and 2 HOA moms had set up a coffee stand with a tip jar labeled Lake Donation. Karen strutted around like she was queen of the waterfront, handing out sunscreen samples and chatting with couples about potential improvements to our shared space. At one point, I caught her pointing at a cove and saying that's where the kayak racks will go next season. I nearly choked. But here's the thing about people like Karen, they mistake silence for surrender. And I'm a big believer in giving someone just enough rope to build their own noose. So I kept my cool. I smiled. I waved when they waved. I even helped a confused teenager pull his dad's car out of a muddy spot near the treeline. All while planning my next move. See, my family has a history with stubborn people. My grandpa once built an entire barn just to block a neighbor's view of his fields after a fence dispute. I come from that kind of DNA. So when someone tells me I don't own what I clearly do, I don't argue. I act. Quietly. Legally. And permanently. And that's exactly what I was about to do to Karen. Because if she wanted to pretend this lake was for everyone, I was going to build something that would make her remember the meaning of private property forever. A message written not in angry words or lawsuits, but in steel posts, barbed wire, and a gate that only opens one way. My way. The Monday after the so-called Community Lake Day, I woke up to a thick stack of white envelopes stuffed into my ranch mailbox, each one bearing the same emblem in the top left corner, Willow Creek HOA. For a moment I actually chuckled. There were 6 of them. I thought maybe it was more poorly disguised propaganda from Karen. But when I opened them, my grin vanished. The first was a citation for obstructing community access. The second claimed I had illegally denied public utilities by failing to provide restroom facilities at a shared-use site. Another accused me of environmental violations for allowing agricultural runoff into the lake. The last one actually fined me for hosting an unauthorized gathering. That part made me laugh again, since I hadn't hosted anything. Karen had. On my land. Without permission. But now I was being billed for it. It was like being mugged and then invoiced for the thief's gas money. It was clear now. Karen wasn't just playing HOA president, she was declaring war. She had weaponized the paper trail. It didn't matter that the HOA had zero legal authority over my property. She was banking on the bureaucracy being slow enough that by the time anything reached a court, her version of events would be seen as normal. And as ridiculous as that sounded, I knew from experience that perception often outweighs facts, especially when enough people start parroting the same lie. I needed leverage. Not just photos and paperwork, I needed something public, something visible. But before that, I decided to confront her one last time in the hopes of avoiding a full-blown circus. I walked down to the lake where a few of the regular guests were now sunbathing like they had beachfront timeshares. I found Karen standing near a folding table with a clipboard, surveying the scene like she was managing a beachfront resort. I asked her calmly to stop encouraging people to enter private property. She gave me this bored look and said the community already voted to recognize the lake as an extension of shared space. I asked her when that vote happened. She said last Thursday. I said that was interesting since none of the landowners were notified. She smirked and said the HOA only had jurisdiction over its own members, which meant their internal vote was all that mattered. I asked if she realized how psychotic that sounded. She accused me of being hostile and warned that any further threats would be documented. I hadn't even raised my voice. That night, I updated my file. I scanned the new citations, time-stamped the photos from that day, and backed everything up to a hard drive. I wasn't just preparing for a legal case, I was building a legacy of proof. Karen had crossed from entitled into delusional, and people like that only understand one language: escalation. So I made some calls. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I called Derek. Derek is a contractor who owes me a favor after I helped him get zoning cleared for a storage unit project 2 years ago. I asked him how fast he could get his hands on livestock fencing, steel posts, and a decent-sized excavator. He asked if I had cattle. I said no, but I had bigger pests to deal with. He laughed and said he could get started the following week. While Derek arranged supplies, I paid another visit to the county records office and asked the clerk, an older man named Stewart, to walk me through any recent HOA expansion filings. I suspected Karen had tried to file something ridiculous, maybe to officially include my lake in the Willow Creek overlay. Sure enough, Stewart found a submission from their HOA dated 3 weeks ago, a request to update the community map to include what they labeled as Lake Willow Commons. It had been flagged as invalid and rejected, but Karen had gone around telling people it was approved. Classic move. Spread a lie loud enough and wait for the truth to get tired. I took a certified copy of that rejection notice and had it laminated. Then I drove back to the lake and nailed it right onto their fake community board, directly over their rules sheet. I watched from the woods as one of the HOA ladies tried to tear it off in frustration. She gave up after a few minutes, clearly confused. The illusion was cracking, and I wasn't done yet. The next day, the equipment arrived. A big, yellow excavator that looked like it came straight from a construction site rolled down my dirt trail like the cavalry. Karen was outside sipping iced tea on a lawn chair, wearing a visor and acting like she had beach property in Malibu. When she saw the machinery, she perked up and walked over. I greeted her with a polite smile. She asked what we were building. I said something beautiful. She asked if it was a new pier. I said sort of. She told me to make sure it met the community aesthetic standard. I nodded and told her I'd take her suggestions under consideration. I have never lied so sincerely in my life. Derek and I worked for days. We mapped out a perimeter around the entire lake, driving steel posts deep into the soil every 10 feet. We ran heavy-duty wire between them and planned for a secure gate at the only entry point along the trail from the neighborhood. The fence wouldn't just block access, it would send a message. That lake was mine, and I would define its borders in steel if that's what it took to keep the delusion at bay. During construction, we were interrupted several times. One HOA dad stomped over with a fishing pole demanding to know what the hell we were doing. I handed him a copy of my deed. He said it must be fake. Another teenager shouted that the lake was public. I pointed at the cameras we had installed in the trees. That shut him up quickly. The real comedy came when Karen marched down with a clipboard, accusing us of defacing a natural landmark. Derek nearly choked on his Gatorade. I calmly explained that building a fence on your own property is perfectly legal, especially when it's in response to mass trespassing. She snapped that we were violating the spirit of community. I asked her to show me where that was in the municipal code. She stormed off muttering about calling the state. I knew the fence itself wouldn't be enough in the long run. Karen would find another angle. She always did. But it was a start. A line in the sand, or in this case around the water. It bought me time. It gave me leverage. And it infuriated her, which frankly made the entire process more satisfying. By the end of the week, the entire lake was surrounded. The gate was installed. A weatherproof sign was posted on the trail, private lake. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. That night, as the sun set and the reflection danced across the surface of my now fortified lake, I sat in a lawn chair and watched 2 HOA couples walk down the trail, stop at the gate, read the sign, and turn around looking bewildered. I sipped my beer and smiled. The message had been received. But I knew Karen wouldn't take this lying down. Her pride was wounded. Her illusion was shattered. And something told me she was already plotting her next move. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was setting the trap. And she was already halfway inside. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. The first real explosion happened the following Saturday, right around noon. Karen, fully decked out in red lipstick and a bright white tennis outfit, stood in front of the newly installed gate with her arms folded and a crowd of confused neighbors behind her. Some had brought lawn chairs, others held inflatable pool floats, and one man awkwardly carried a half-inflated unicorn ring. They looked like tourists denied boarding at the airport. Karen, naturally, took center stage, shouting about civil liberties, historical access, and community right. It was like watching a local theater production of a courtroom drama written by someone who'd only seen one episode of Law and Order. I watched from the other side of the lake, sipping lemonade with Derek and my friend Sam, who had come by just in time for the show. Derek had bet me $20 she'd try to ram the gate with her SUV. I said she was too calculated for that, but I wasn't ruling it out entirely. Sure enough, Karen eventually left in a huff and returned 15 minutes later in her Lexus SUV, idling aggressively near the gate like she was trying to psych it out. She didn't ram it, but she did lay on the horn and start barking orders at a teenager to go find someone in charge. The irony of that made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled my drink. Later that day, I found a fresh sign nailed to the outside of the gate. It read, "Willow Creek demands access to shared lake." Beneath it were 10 signatures, some of which were just first names written in bubble letters. I carefully removed the sign, scanned it for my records, and then added a laminated county map showing the real property boundaries in its place. I included a little QR code at the bottom that linked directly to the county assessor's website, just to give the more curious ones something to chew on. I never heard a single thank you for that, which honestly felt like a missed opportunity for them. Of course, Karen didn't stop there. The next week she hosted an emergency HOA meeting in her backyard. One of her more reasonable neighbors, Alan, who occasionally fished on the lake before all this drama, gave me a heads up. Apparently, Karen had printed out blown-up photos of the fence, and was claiming I had installed it illegally on public land. She passed around her infamous map with the hand-drawn pink borders, still pretending it had legal weight. When one board member asked her where she got her information, she said a friend at the county office had confirmed it verbally. According to Alan, 3 members walked out right after that. It wasn't just about the fence anymore, it was about her credibility. Or lack of it. Karen, sensing she was losing support, pivoted tactics. She organized what she called a peaceful lakeside protest. About 20 people showed up with signs saying things like "Free the water," "No walls on lakes," and my personal favorite, "Fish don't recognize property lines." A guy brought a tambourine. A woman handed out kale chip. It was all very dramatic and unintentionally hilarious. They stood outside the gate chanting, which mostly confused the cows grazing nearby, and shouted things like community over capitalism at a lake that had been privately owned since before their subdivision had electricity. I filmed the whole thing from a distance, not to mock them, necessarily, but because I had a feeling it might come in handy. Sure enough, the next morning, I received a formal complaint from the HOA's legal committee. It was a PDF file attached to an email that looked like it had been written using a legal-sounding template from the internet. It accused me of interfering with community harmony, restricting neighborhood access to essential recreational spaces, and constructing a barrier that endangered wildlife migration. That last part almost made me spit coffee all over my laptop. I printed the letter and added it to the growing file labeled HOA Nonsense. Then I drafted a response, attached every legal deed, plat map, county record, and wildlife survey I had gathered over the past month, and copied the sheriff's office for good measure. 2 days later, a deputy showed up, not to investigate me, but to deliver a warning to the HOA. Apparently, someone had reported trespassers sneaking around the backside of my fence at night. My trail cameras confirmed it. I had footage of a man and woman, both middle-aged, both wearing hoodies, trying to slip through a gap where the fencing wasn't fully finished yet. They had a flashlight and what looked like bolt cutters. They didn't succeed, thanks to an early morning visit from a skunk, which might be the only time I've ever felt gratitude toward a wild animal. The deputy warned the HOA that any further incidents would result in charges. He also made it clear that the lake was private and had never been under their jurisdiction. Karen, predictably, was not pleased. She sent out a community newsletter titled The Lake Lies, in which she claimed I had bribed local officials, manipulated documents, and was hoarding water access for personal gain. She even accused me of polluting the lake to justify cutting off access. I had to laugh at that one. I hadn't so much as dropped a fishing hook in that lake since this whole circus began. Despite her increasingly wild claims, I noticed a shift in the neighborhood. People weren't backing her up as much anymore. Some stopped showing up to her protests. Others started asking questions. One guy even emailed me directly to apologize for his wife yelling at me during week 1. He said they had no idea Karen had made everything up. I told him no hard feelings, and that if anyone wanted to fish, they could ask for permission like a normal neighbor. That seemed to land well. Karen, however, was not done playing queen of the imaginary lake empire. The next week, she escalated in the only way she knew how, through litigation. I received a letter from her personal attorney threatening a lawsuit over the unlawful obstruction of shared community resources. The letter was long, dense, and full of circular logic that somehow both contradicted and repeated itself. My favorite line was the part where it called the lake a spiritual and emotional cornerstone of neighborhood identity. That's rich, considering she hadn't so much as seen the water before last summer. I sent the letter to my real attorney, who responded with a cease and desist warning and a request for formal documentation of any claimed ownership, which I knew she couldn't provide. We gave them 7 business days to respond. While we waited, I kept documenting everything. More protest signs, more sneaky attempts to access the lake through the woods, more late-night meetings in Karen's backyard where I was told they tried to draft a new community charter that included non-owned land under temporary stewardship. That one was particularly desperate. By the end of the week, something surprising happened. A few members of the HOA board showed up at my gate, not with signs, but with coffee and nervous smiles. They said they wanted to talk. Apparently, several members had grown uncomfortable with Karen's actions and didn't want to be legally tied to her claims. They asked if I'd be willing to sit down and talk to the board without her present. I told them I'd think about it, which was my way of saying not until pigs fly. When the official court summons arrived, printed on stiff legal stationery with the seal of the county courthouse pressed into the top corner, I knew Karen had finally committed to her most disastrous move yet. It wasn't just a threat this time, it was real. She was suing me in small claims court, accusing me of unlawful obstruction, environmental sabotage, and emotional distress caused by the denial of recreational access. Emotional distress, caused by offense, on private property, that she had no legal right to step foot on in the first place. I wasn't angry. Honestly, I was impressed. It takes a special kind of delusion to double down on a fantasy, then drag it into a courtroom wearing high heels and a smug grin. My attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Trina, took one look at the case and laughed so hard she had to set down her coffee. The first page of the filing called me the alleged custodian of formerly communal waters. The rest was a fever dream of misused legal terms, screenshots of community Facebook posts, blurry drone photos of the fence, and even a list of so-called lake use testimonies, which were mostly neighbors saying things like I walked past the lake once and it looked peaceful and open to all. It would have been funny if it weren't so serious. Because once something lands in court, even the most absurd complaint has to be treated like it matters. The hearing date was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Karen turned her personal war into a public campaign. She printed flyers and had teenagers tape them to every community mailbox. She filmed a dramatic video standing in front of the locked gate, her voice trembling as she spoke about the injustice of losing access to what she called nature's gift to all. The video ended with her turning slowly to face the lake and whispering, "We will reclaim this." The HOA Facebook group was flooded with her rants, each one more dramatic than the last. She accused me of erasing community traditions, of poisoning the spirit of togetherness, and my favorite, of converting a sacred ecosystem into a weapon of exclusion. She didn't just want to win. She wanted to be seen as a martyr. But beneath the dramatic flair, cracks were spreading. The HOA board remained eerily silent during her rants. A few neighbors messaged me privately, expressing their exhaustion. They said their families had been dragged into something ridiculous, and several planned to skip the court hearing altogether. I told them I understood. I didn't blame them. Karen was like a tornado. She sucked everything into her storm and spat out chaos. I spent those weeks preparing a case so airtight it could have doubled as a submarine. Trina and I compiled land records going back 70 years, original deeds, certified surveys, and official correspondence from the county zoning department. We had footage from trail cams, the laminated rejection letter from Karen's own failed overlay filing, and a printed transcript of her protest video where she proudly admitted the community had taken back the lake. I even threw in copies of the fake citations she'd mailed me, complete with their lack of official stamps or code. Trina said the judge would either dismiss it on the spot or let it unravel in real time. Either way, she brought popcorn. The day of the hearing arrived like a poorly advertised community play. The courtroom was half full. On one side sat Karen, dressed like she was attending a garden party, with a small entourage of HOA loyalists. On the other sat me, Trina, and a stack of well-organized evidence that looked like it could crush a minivan. The judge, a tired man with coffee stains on his robe and an expression like he'd seen too many of these neighborhood squabbles in his career, called us forward. Karen launched into her monologue before anyone asked her to. She spoke about unity and childhood memories and the trauma of seeing fences where freedom once existed. She cited completely fabricated legal precedents, claiming that because some members of the HOA had used the lake peacefully for months, they had earned community rights under implied consent. Trina leaned over and whispered that Karen was now arguing a doctrine that only applies to communal city alleys and sidewalks, not spring-fed lakes on private ranches. Then it was our turn. Trina laid it out clean and simple. She presented the land deeds, the aerial maps, the rejected overlay filing, the wildlife camera footage, and then, with a polite smile, handed over a full-color photo of Karen's protest sign that read "Reclaim the Lake," stapled next to a trespassing warning. The judge barely glanced at her afterward. He turned to Karen and asked if she had brought any legally binding documents to support her claim. She said no, but she had heart. The room went silent. The judge sighed, adjusted his glasses, and delivered what I can only describe as a polite takedown. He stated very clearly that the lake was private, that the fence was legal, that Karen had no standing to claim communal use, and that by organizing events on land she neither owned nor had permission to use, she had opened herself to potential liability. Then, in a move that shocked even Trina, he ordered her to pay for the removal of unauthorized signs, to reimburse me for legal fees, and to issue a formal retraction of her claims in the HOA newsletter. Karen sat frozen. Her jaw moved but no sound came out. The storm she'd whipped up for months had just been flattened in less than 30 minutes. After the hearing, I walked outside into the sun, letting the warm air wash over me. It was done. The illusion was over. But I didn't get long to breathe before the next surprise hit. 2 days after the ruling, I received a call from Alan, the same neighbor who had been feeding me quiet updates about HOA meetings. He said Karen had refused to issue the retraction. The board was furious. She had also tried to expense her legal costs to the HOA, claiming it was a sanctioned defense of community values. The treasurer rejected her request and immediately filed a vote for removal. Within a week, Karen was ousted as HOA president. No ceremony. No farewell. Just an email stating her resignation and a blank space where her name used to sit on the HOA website. But poetic justice wasn't finished. Karen had to pay out of pocket for the damages, and when she stalled, the court authorized a lien on her home. Suddenly, the woman who tried to steal my lake found herself on the wrong end of property law. She listed her house for sale within a month. But in a twist even I couldn't have scripted better, the buyer ended up being a real estate investment group that turned the house into a vacation rental called Willow Retreat. The kicker? It advertised scenic views of a nearby private lake. Word spread quickly. Neighbors started joking about how Karen went from self-declared lake queen to local legend of how not to run an HOA. A few even sent me screenshots of reviews on the rental listing that mentioned seeing a tall, barbed wire fence and wondering about the peace on the ranch. Felt unfamiliar at first, like waking up in a house where the power's finally back after a week-long blackout. I'd grown so used to the tension, the nonsense, the late-night HOA shenanigans and drama-filled mornings that actual calm made me second-guess it. But sure enough, days turned into weeks and the lake stayed quiet. No banners. No flyers. No rogue paddleboarders or chalk arrows on the trail pretending to guide people to a community lake that never existed. The fence still stood strong, barbed wire intact, keypad gate unbothered. And Karen was gone. Officially, legally, and for good. The silence was refreshing, but it also made me think. That whole war, over a patch of water in the middle of my ranch, had nearly cost me more than time and money. It almost stole my sense of home. So I decided to take what had happened and flip it on its head. I'd spent so much time protecting the lake that I'd never really considered what else it could be. Not for the HOA, not for the neighborhood, but for me. For something real. Something that couldn't be twisted into a fake community landmark or hijacked by entitled neighbors with an overinflated sense of ownership. So I started drawing up plans. Not to reopen it to the public, but to reinvent how I used it. The first call I made was to my cousin Rob, who ran a couple cabins in the northern part of the state. He knew the short-term rental market and had once told me my lake could pull in big money with the right setup. At the time I thought that was ridiculous. Now it felt like the logical next step. He drove down a few days later and helped me scout the best spots. We picked a shady corner of the lake with flat ground and a view of the sunset across the water. Over the next 2 months, with Derek's crew helping on and off, I built 3 small but sturdy cabins with wraparound porches, solar power, and just enough modern touches to keep guests comfortable without ruining the natural feel. I named the project Pine Loop Retreat. Simple. Honest. The name had no fake history, no imaginary rules, no emotional manipulation. Just cabins by a private lake. I listed them online, and within a week they were booked solid for the summer. People came from all over to experience the quiet. Fishermen. Writers. City folks desperate for silence. They all respected the space. Some asked about the fence. A few wondered aloud about the HOA signs they'd seen driving in, and I'd smile and tell them it was a long story better suited for a campfire and a second drink. I installed a new gate system with guest codes that reset every weekend. Put up security lights, cameras, and even added a tiny bait shop near the entrance, just enough to sell some fishing rods and marshmallows. Sam helped me build it out of reclaimed barnwood, and we hung a cheeky sign above the door that read Private Waters Bait and Chill. It wasn't a dig at Karen. Not exactly. But anyone who knew the story would definitely get the joke. Funny thing was, I didn't even have to advertise. The place sold itself. Word spread quickly through online forums, fishing blogs, and local travel sites. I started getting emails from people saying they used to live in the area and always wondered about the lake behind the fence. One even admitted they'd been part of the protests and apologized for believing the HOA version of event. I appreciated the honesty. Told them no hard feelings, just don't bring a tambourine. Business was good. Real good. But the best part wasn't the money, it was the control. Every square inch of that lake, every cabin, every guest, every rule, it was all mine. No one could show up and claim community access. No one could fake a vote or draw a pink line on a map and pretend it overruled the law. That lake had gone from a secret spot my grandfather loved to a war zone and now, finally, to something meaningful again. But as with all things in life, peace comes with surprises. One sunny afternoon in late spring, a family booked one of the cabins for a weekend stay. Seemed normal enough. Quiet on the phone. Paid on time. Showed up early. It wasn't until I saw the mom step out of the car that my stomach dropped. There she was. Karen. Not in full battle gear this time. No clipboard. No laminated signs. Just jeans, a baseball cap, and an expression I couldn't read. Her husband looked tense. The kids ran down toward the dock like they had no idea what kind of storm their mother had once tried to start on this very land. We locked eyes for a second. Neither of us said anything. I expected her to cancel the stay, storm off, make a scene. But instead, she just nodded and walked toward the cabin like any other guest. I didn't approach her. Didn't offer a tour. But I kept my distance and watched the weekend unfold. She didn't step near the fence line. She didn't wander into restricted areas. She didn't even let her kids swim without checking the rules posted on the porch. It was like she was pretending to be a stranger. Like she'd buried the entire thing under a thick coat of forget it ever happened. On the morning they checked out, she left the keys in the box and drove away without saying a word. But later that afternoon, I found an envelope tucked under a bag of trash they'd left neatly beside the door. Inside was a short note. No apology. No excuses. Just one line written in shaky handwriting. I thought I owned it. I didn't. You did. I folded it up and slipped it into the back of my ledger, right behind the first HOA citation she ever sent me. It felt like the end of something. Not forgiveness. Not closure. Just acknowledgement. A few months later, the HOA board formally voted to ban all future events near the property line. They didn't name me or the lake, but it was obvious what the decision was about. I didn't care. They could make all the rules they wanted, as long as they stayed on their side of the fence. That invisible wall they'd once ignored had now become permanent in more ways than one. I upgraded the dock. Built a second one closer to the cabins. Added a floating fire pit that guests loved in the evenings. Sam joked that we should start selling fence-side tickets to people who want to see the edge of HOA country without crossing into it. I laughed, but I kind of liked the idea. Maybe next year. The final touch came that fall when I installed a hand-carved wooden sign near the main entrance. Nothing flashy. Just a polished slab of oak with engraved letters that read "Lake belongs to the ranch." Beneath it, I added a small phrase I'd been thinking about since all this began. Fences keep out lies too. Simple. Sharp. True. And that was that. The land stayed mine. The water stayed private. The fence stayed up. And the story of the HOA that tried to steal a lake became the local version of an urban legend. Every time someone asked if it really happened, I'd tell them the same thing. Ask Karen. She stayed here once. Paid full price too. No discount for former presidents.